this computer. All right, we should be good to go. Yeah, so where was that? Yeah, it's World Migratory Bird Day, and it's an international day. And so this year the theme is sing, soar, and fly like a bird, and it's sort of asking everyone to focus on the bird song and bird flight paths that actually unite all the world in one way or another. So it's sort of a pretty poignant theme for the time that we're in, and especially considering we're still on Zoom after all this time. But there are things that unite us. So I'm going to focus really on shorebirds, but it's probably important to note that the song of the migratory birds is probably being heard by everyone in the last week, particularly. So we'll have the coels or stormbirds that you'll hear. I'm actually surprised I can't hear one now getting into the call, and the channel-billed cuckoos. So they're migratory birds that are pretty familiar to everyone, and really this part of the world, it's the real sound of spring. But I'll focus in a bit on shorebirds. Oh, there we go. So the migratory paths of shorebirds are sort of broadly divided up into flyways. So we've got a bunch of different ones across the world. We're going to really focus on the one on the right here. So this is the East Asian Australian flyway. And so the majority of our migratory shorebirds will use this flyway from up in the, oh, I'll go to the next slide. There we go. Yeah, so from up the northern hemisphere in the tundra sort of area, this is where most of our shorebirds, actually all of them except for one, the double-banded plover, will migrate from the north to the south and back again, spending our summer in the south, and most of them breeding in the north in the tundra when it's pretty much frozen for most of the year. But in the short summer period, it thaws out and the productivity is massive. So there's heaps of insect life, and they can pretty much feed for 24 hours a day because it's light all the time. So the birds have a really short window to breed fast, grow fast, and then fly back. And typically the parents will leave first, and then the juveniles that have just fledged within around 6 weeks of hatching or less will fly back on their own and make their way often back to the place where their parents might be. So these arrows, I feel like they're unnecessarily complicated, but the little points in the middle here, there's often stopover points. Not all the birds will fly in one go. Some of them stop over in sort of the Korean Peninsula and Japan and the Yellow Sea area. Really, really important stopovers. And in some areas, their development's quite heavy, so it's a bit of a problem if a bird goes to stop over after flying for a few thousand kilometers and it can't stop anywhere. So that's just one of the many troubles that they face. But some of the birds even fly all the way in one go, and I'll get to a pretty good example that we've had here just the other day actually. But first I'll give a bit of an overview of what is a shorebird. So it's a pretty broad term. It covers 12 families and about 200 species. They're typically long-legged birds associated with wetland habitats. We have about 36 species in Australia. They're not all migratory. We do have resident shorebirds that don't migrate. They might migrate sort of small distances up and down the coast, or once they've fledged, they might sort of find their own territory. But a good proportion of them are migratory, and most of them breed in the northern hemisphere. So actually I meant to say, if anyone's got questions, feel free to just add them in the chat and I'll get to them to the end, or just hold them till the end and I'll do my best to answer any questions anyone may have. So I'll just cover a couple of different species that we have here in the Manning. So this one pictured now, this is the far eastern curlew. It's the biggest of all the shorebirds. Pretty easy to see and pretty easy to identify. It's got a really long beak. There's a couple of other birds similar shape, but that beak is it's pretty long. And the sort of general rule, if you're trying to ID one, is think can it touch its bum with its beak, and this one it can. And they're about 40 centimeters in height and weigh around 1.3 kilos. And you'll see them at Harrington and at Old Bar pretty all year. There's a few, like some will overwinter here, but just this week we've had the shorebird numbers have really picked up. There's, I think, probably about 40 here now, maybe. I counted 20 at Farquhar yesterday, so the numbers have really picked up in this last week. So that's the biggest shorebird, and the smallest that we also get here in the Manning is a redneck stint. They also fly from the north, and they are, I think they'd only be about 10 centimeters tall and weigh about 30 grams, so pretty much as a piece of toast. And they're in pretty reasonable numbers here as well. They're sort of hard to see. They sort of on the shingly sand, they blend in pretty well. So I'll just go to the next slide. This is the eastern curlew's migration patterns. So if you see up in the green area here is where they breed, and they'll spend the northern summer up there and then stop off sites again around this sort of Central Asia islands in the Pacific, and then come down and spend our summer on the eastern coast here. And so an important thing is that they come and they pretty much need to feed fairly constantly to regain enough body mass and energy to firstly recover from the flight. So when they get here, often their feathers will be all haggard because they literally get worn out from flapping so many times. And they'll, they come and feed and rest up and get ready to head back again. So I'll go to the next species. This is a bar-tailed godwit. So these are also pretty good numbers here. I think there's about 100 at Harrington now, and there was about 10 at Farquhar yesterday. And some of them will overwinter, but most of them will go back. I think some of the ones that overwinter might be juveniles. So they've bred and flown down from the Northern Hemisphere because they don't really have a choice but to leave their breeding grounds because it freezes over. So they've got a real motivation to leave. But once they're here, they can pretty safely overwinter. So these have the longest migration of any bird, longest non-stop migration of any bird. The record was about 11,000 kilometers, but it's just been, through radio tracking, it's just been broken, I think, at about 13,000 kilometers non-stop. So it's about 8 days, I think, about an average of 50 kilometers an hour. And so to achieve this, shorebirds have some pretty interesting physiological functions. So they'll feed up heaps and put on a lot of fat. Apparently they look like little footballs when they take off, these godwits. And then when they get here, they lose, I think it's about half their body weight they can lose in that flight. So they'll burn fat, and they've also gotten an adaptation where they can turn fat into glucose to sort of power their brain while they're flying. Before they fly, as they fatten up, their stomachs will shrink and their lungs and heart will enlarge. And I think some of their muscles will enlarge. So they're sort of preparing, getting rid of what they don't need, or shrinking down what they don't need, and enlarging what they do need for the flight. So it's pretty remarkable. And so it's been known for a while that they've done long journeys. And just the other day, a Facebook group I follow, the Koro Miranda Shorebird Centre, posted on Facebook saying that one of the bar-tailed godwits they were tracking had landed in Manning Point, New South Wales, which was perfect timing because yesterday we have been doing some monthly surveys with Hastings bird watchers to try and survey each inlet of the Manning every month to try and get an idea of shorebird species and numbers over the whole year. So being the shorebird nerd that I was pretty excited by this, and I went, well, I'm going to go and find that bird. So I did. Luckily, it was just in a group of 10. And so this is the bird pictured here yesterday. It's got color-coded leg bands on. I don't know how well everyone can see that. And a little aerial sticking out the back of it. That's a little radio transmitter. I can't actually see the transmitter. I think it's up around the wing. So this map here, Adrian Regan from the Shorebird Centre was kind enough to let me use it. Down in New Zealand, the blue site down here, I think that was where it was tagged. I'm assuming last year. I haven't really had a chance to follow it up. This was only yesterday that I found this bird, and the day before that I saw it had landed in the Manning. So it was tagged in New Zealand last winter and flew up to the Yellow Sea here for a rest, and then up to Siberia, where presumably it might have bred. I don't know if they know that or not. I'm hoping to find out some more details. I think it'd be a good case study to going forward. Anyway, it flew around here a bit, and then from this YK Delta in Alaska, flew non-stop all the way to Manning Point, which probably more likely was Harrington or Farquhar, because there's not much landing spot at Manning Point. So I think the theory is that possibly the winds just made it easier to come down to New South Wales. So that's a migration of 33,000 kilometres so far this year, and that bird hopefully will feed up and head back again at the end of summer. It might stay in the Manning. I don't really know, but we'll certainly be keeping a lookout for it. So that was my bit of excitement for the week. I was pretty thrilled about that. So the next bird I would like to talk about is the little terns. So probably a lot of people, if you've been in the Manning for a while, will be familiar with the little tern. The Manning's been a really important site for little terns for quite a long time, and some form of monitoring has been happening beginning in Harrington for 27 years. I think this is the 28th year of the program. I've been looking after the program for 3 years. This is my 3rd season. I've had a couple of pretty rough seasons for a variety of reasons. They're really up against it, these birds. I'll get onto the threats in a bit. So the little terns are also migratory. I don't know as much about the little tern migration. I don't know that there's much literature out there, but there's sort of Southeast Asia they'll go to. So some of them breed here, and there's a population that breed in Southeast Asia, and I think like Japan, but they're sort of all over the world. I think they have some in Ireland and America and Mexico, but I don't know how much all the populations cross over. So they're reasonably common. They're a fairly small tern, hence the name, and they've arrived in the Manning just in the last week or so. So if you head out to Harrington or Farquhar, you can probably see them roosting. Even without binoculars, you can kind of tell. So there'll be a lot of crested terns, which are pretty big, probably about as big as a magpie, but tern looking, and they've got kind of a spiky hairdo. So you'll see a lot of them pretty much year round. And then a smaller tern, like much smaller, probably 15 centimeters off the ground, you'll see them roosting now. And you'll see them take off in flocks, a little chattering sound. So they nest here on the sand spit. So they really like freshly turned over sand, which is problematic because of where it is. It's often quite low lying. If it's really dry, the sand drift can cover eggs. And then there's a whole lot of human threats they'll get to. So they nest in these little scrapes on the ground. They'll scrape a little hole and then lay between 1 and 3 eggs and sit on them. I don't have an egg. They're about the size of a quail egg though, so they're pretty small, but I guess probably fairly big for the size of the bird. I'll sit on them for about 21 days and then they hatch, and then they pretty much feed flat out. So if you look at the previous photo, that's a whole bit of whitebait or pilchard. And so they feed the birds flat stick for 3 weeks, and then they'll fledge. And so they can fly from about 3 weeks of age. But these chicks here, that's probably day 1 or 2, I think. So they're tiny when they're born. You fit a couple of them in the palm of your hand. So they hatch on the sand, and then they run around on the sand for 3 weeks, and then hopefully they fledge. And so they're sort of breed in a colony. So that's why I think if you see at Harrington, there's fences up, and there's also some fences at Farquhar. We just try and keep people and dogs out, and try to keep them away as much as we can. It's a real focus on sharing the beach though. It's never really worked in the past to totally exclude people. So it's it's a real balancing act between giving people some space and giving the birds some space. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The final bird I'll talk about today is the pied oyster catcher. These are not migratory, so I shouldn't, perhaps I'll get in trouble for talking about them on Migratory Bird Day, but I think they deserve a mention because they pretty successfully breed here in the Manning, and that's another part of my job. So that there's 3 species I monitor for the beach warden job, and it's the little terns, pied oyster catchers, and the beach stone curlew, but there's only 1 beach stone curlew at the moment, so there's no breeding happening. So the pied oyster catchers are, well, probably one of the most distinctive birds you'll see really along the shoreline. They've got that black and white feathers and that really bright orange beak, and they make a pretty good racket this time of year. So these ones here, they're sort of, I don't know whether they're establishing their territory or sort of courting, but they make a fair racket around this time of year, and you'll see them. This is just down at Harrington, this photo. They also lay on the beach a little bit higher than the little tern. So they lay sort of where you see the beach spinifex and the hydrocotyle there. Just another little scrape, and lay a couple of speckly eggs about the size of chook eggs. And then their incubation's about 28 days. So after that period, the chicks will hatch, and then this one's sort of medium age. It's sort of getting, it hasn't quite got feathers yet, and they'll run around too, and they can eat they feed themselves from straight away. So that's, like, we call that precocial young, and most shorebirds are precocial. The little tern's not technically a shorebird, but yeah, they get fed by their parents. So these guys, and as with the little terns, their defense, the only real defense they have is to hide. So if they see you coming, they pretty much hide straight away. And these pied oyster catchers, if you don't see where they hide their babies, you have a real tough time finding them. So you kind of got to stand your distance and get a pretty good view from a distance. So we've had 1 batch of chicks this year, and I thought there was just 1 chick. So I typically don't hang around. If I'm checking the nest and there's chicks there, I'll just sort of have a look and then move on. And then yesterday I was drifting past and noticed that the pair that has had a chick has 2 chicks. So that's 2 weeks of evading my gaze. They've been able to hide one of their chicks, and yeah, this bird on its first attempt this year has well, the 2 birds have had 2 chicks, so that's pretty good. If they can have chicks in their first attempt, ideally, well, if these survive, they'll be fledged by the Christmas holidays, which is pretty important for survival because this is on a little island, but people bring dogs in their boats and use the island. So it's just, yeah, it's really good if we can get the first batch of chicks to fledge, and that's been found in the little tern colonies as well. There's always been an emphasis on really trying to get the success the first time. If you notice, this bird's also tagged, which is pretty handy. It was tagged in Coffs Harbour, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe. But it's bred in the same spot, pretty much within 6 or 7 meters of the nests for the last 3 years at least. So the tags are a really useful thing. We don't tag birds in the Manning. It would be good, but it's for a good reason. There's a lot of regulation around it, and it's a bit of a mission, and you have to be able to justify. I don't think it's too distressing for birds, but you have to be able to justify the reasons for doing it. But anyway, I'll move on. Oh, actually, there's one more bird to talk about. So another migratory bird, not technically like migratory to Australia, but it's the only place in Australia they've ever been seen at Farquhar and Harrington. This is the Aleutian tern. So these, I think, typically spend the southern summer in Indonesia or around that area, but they're from the Aleutian Islands, which I believe are just off Alaska. And a few years back, a local, well, he's from Port Macquarie, Liam Murphy, was looking back through some photos and sort of went, oh, something's not right. These terns don't quite look the same. And then after a bit of back and forth, I think, and talking to some experts, I went, oh, this is the this is an Aleutian tern. That's the only time they've been seen in Australia. And they've been back every summer since 2017, possibly been coming here for years. You have to have a pretty keen eye, I think, to see that. And they, most of the time at Farquhar, they have been seen at Harrington a couple of times. But these birds generated a huge fuss when they got seen for the first time. People were coming, actually from all over Australia. I've met people from Broome at Farquhar, and a person did a study on, I think he interviewed a lot of the birdos that came to see the birds. I think that first season, the Aleutian terns brought in about $350,000 into the area just from people coming to see them. So I just sort of thought it was worth the mention for a couple of reasons, because it's pretty unique to this area, and also the potential for tourism dollars coming into the area. These people they're typically not really damaging the environment, like they're not driving all over the beaches. It's, in my opinion, it's something worth looking at and something worth celebrating, to bring money into local businesses and coming to celebrate our natural diversity. Yeah, so pretty neat little bird, and hopefully they'll be back, I think, around November, first week of November-ish. So I'll move on to the Manning. So the circled areas, the Manning inlets. I'm not sure if everyone here is from the Manning or not, but yeah, so we've got the North Inlet here at Harrington and Farquhar. So these this aerial map just highlights, it's a super mobile environment, and that mobile environment's exactly what these animals like. Most of the shorebirds really want a good clear line of sight so they can see predators, and they like the big mud flats, and different places on the mud flats are suitable for different shorebirds. If you noticed, probably get a slide together actually, they've all got really different beaks, like different shapes, different lengths, and that allows them to attack a different spatial bit of food. And so the eastern curlews, they go nearly 30 centimeters into the ground, whereas the little plovers beak, they're only feeding on the surface. So there's quite a lot of spatial diversity in their feeding habitat. So these big mud and sand flats provide a whole lot of different habitat. Like, well, at the first glance, it might just seem like a heap of sand. When you start to break it down in areas, you start to see it's actually quite diverse. And that relies on it being turned over often, so vegetation doesn't take over. And you maintain that really highly mobile sand environment. So the shorebirds, they'll eat sort of most probably any invertebrate in the sand, in the sand and the mud, and their beaks, like I was saying, will sort of dictate what they eat. The pied oyster catchers. Oh, what's going on? The pied oyster catchers is a good example of a big, powerful beak, and they'll crush open the pippies, the bivalves. Whereas some of the godwits, or their beak will sort of probe pretty deep in the mud. I'm pretty sure they have nerve endings in the end, so they can feel stuff moving down there and feel around and get some of the smaller stuff. Whereas the plovers with the short beaks on the surface, they've got really big eyes, so they're a visual predator. They'll see stuff on the surface and run around and pick it up. I'll move on because I don't want to run too much over time. So, like everything, and particularly the beach, there's a whole lot of threats. So the introduced predators, there's the fairly obvious ones for any Australian animal is foxes, cats, and dogs. In that case, that's a domestic dog. So the ongoing threat with domestic dogs in these beach areas is it stops them from feeding. So if they miss one low tide, that's a 6-hour feeding cycle that they've missed, that they need to get that body fat and muscle built up for the flight back. So it's pretty important to try and keep the dogs and the shorebirds somewhat separate. Foxes is fairly obvious. It's an ongoing problem with ongoing management, mostly fairly successful management. But last year we had a fox that was bait shy that basically destroyed the whole season at Harrington. So that was pretty devastating. Cats, again, pretty constant, but haven't been a threat in the manning. I think there was one year there was a resident's cat that was going out there causing a bit of havoc, but thankfully we haven't had that problem, and I think it can be quite hard to deal with because they're a bit more clever than foxes. And four-wheel drives. Generally, four-wheel drives are pretty well behaved, but annoyingly, the birds like to sit in the wheel ruts sometimes, particularly at Farquhar. I think they'll shelter a bit from the wind, and I think the little chicks can actually get stuck in the wheel ruts. So it's just a problem that we try and manage. That's one of the main reasons for the fencing, just to keep people out, keep four-wheel drives off that middle bit so that at least don't crush the nests. And then there's natural predators like any animal. We've got here, these are gold-billed terns they're aerial predator. They'll fly around and pick stuff off. They're bombarding something there. I don't know what's on the ground, something they can see that I couldn't, but yeah, they'll fly down and pick up eggs straight out of the nest. So I'm actually working on a research project trying to figure out the way to trick them, perhaps. And there's a crow or a raven. I don't even know where that photo came from. It pretty much illustrates their love of eggs though. So, and they're quite smart. They'll associate humans with food. And I think it's really important that we don't, like, if there's crows or ravens around, I just sort of won't go into the nest area, because once they learn, I don't know what we do actually. I think in the past they used to shoot them, but it's not an option now, and possibly it was never a good option. And then crabs, interestingly, little crabs will take eggs and chicks, but not on a level that it's a cause for concern, really. I mean, it's just a background predation thing, but seems to be one or two every year. So how can you help? So everyone can help. We just really try and focus on sharing the shore. So these are environments that everyone wants to use. So just try and give the shorebirds a bit of distance and try and keep dogs well out of their way. I mean, they're not even allowed at all at Farquhar Inlet. The Harrington Sands bit, dogs are allowed, but we try to encourage people to keep them under control. It's respecting fences and educating yourselves and friends and family and just everyone about the shorebirds, because they're sort of unassuming, but once you know a bit about their story, most people are pretty interested to hear at least what's going on. I've actually found it pretty rewarding the last few years. Well, not so much last year, but talking to people along the breakwall in Harrington when it's really busy in summer, people are pretty keen to know what the fence is for. And once people know, they're more likely to comply with any rules, it seems. And watching your step on the beach. So I don't know if anyone can see the nest in that photo, probably quite small on this screen, I suppose. But there's a nest there, just there. So they're really hard to see. So if we just watch our step, if there's possibly nests around, and so the little terns will be flying overhead, chattering, and the pied oyster catchers have quite an interesting habit. They'll walk away looking back at you as if they've done something wrong, and so they're kind of trying to draw a predator away from the nest. And a bird that I didn't have a photo of, perhaps I should have though, the red-capped plover. We'll see them. You see them a lot. They're resident here in the Manning. They also nest on the beach, seemingly fine. A couple of little babies were seen yesterday. Sorry. They don't seem to have any issues. They're tiny little birds, and they look like they have a broken wing when they're trying to draw a predator away from their nest. So they'll like flap on the ground with a broken wing and try and lure a predator away. So just keep your eyes open, and if you see a nest, feel free to let me know and I'll try and put a fence up or something. And if you still want to do and learn more, I'm planning on running a whole heap of walks. I think probably going forward, small groups is going to be the way to go. So if you just probably contact Helen or anyone, and they'll pass on my details, and just let me know. We can get in touch and we can organise some sort of walk. Excuse me. Because obviously we're going to do one today, but hopefully within the next few weeks we'll be able to.
So what I'll do is I'll email everyone that's attended today and just give you all Silas's contact details. So if you are interested in going along on one of the walks, you can contact him. So I think that's the easiest way to do it.
Yep. Thanks, Helen. And on that same note, I'm keen to do talks for whoever's keen. So if you know a community group or anyone that's interested, I'm pretty keen to talk about birds any day of the week, really. And it's part of my job. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to help educate people. Happy to walk out on the beach. At the moment, small groups is fine. So if you've got a family group or some people coming up, I'm out on the beach quite a lot. So yeah, just let me know. And also we've got some little Shorebird booklets that we've got lots of them. So if anyone wants them, again, Helen's going to email you. So I'll get them to you somehow. And local land services have put out quite a lot of these little threatened fauna of the hunter and mid-coast brochures. There's probably about 12 of them, I think. They're not all birds. There's some mammals and like the Manning River turtle. So these are a really great resource. They're put together pretty well. I mean, they're really good for kids, but they're also really good for adults. So if you want any of them, also just let me know and I'll facilitate getting some to you, because they're a fantastic resource. And yeah, they're really useful.
Silas, I don't know if you've seen, but we've got some questions in the chat. Do you want to get to those now?
Yeah, sure do. Okay, I'll start at the top. Oh, I'll just unshare actually.
So I think the first question in the chat is from Anne. She's asked, would the Godwit normally fly back to New Zealand rather than Manning Point? That was the one that was tracked. Facebook.
I'm not really sure. I think probably, I think someone had mentioned on that Pecoro site, Pecoro, that they thought it probably would fly back to New Zealand, but perhaps the prevailing wind on the flight back sort of dictated its last sort of few thousand kilometers. And that's, I mean, it's one of the reasons that they're doing this tracking is to figure that out. So it's definitely probably information that's developing. Yeah, it's a good question. And I think a lot of people would like to know that, but hopefully we can watch this space, because I think they tracked quite a few birds, and perhaps we'll know more soon.
Cool.
And then Helen's question.
Yeah, so because you mentioned that it was good to see the pair's first chicks seed and fledge before the summer holidays, and so I was just wondering how many times they would try if they lost.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell exactly with little terns because they all look really similar, and they're not really tagged, but about 2 or 3 times they'll try. Sometimes if they fail en masse in one nesting area, they'll just head further south or go to another nest area. But you definitely get distinct waves of nesting and quite obvious re-nesting. Like you might have nest fail, and then 2 weeks later you'll have more nests. So around 2 or 3 times, and that's the same for a pied oyster catcher. I think 3 times is the most I've recorded, and they are quite obvious because it's sort of spatially, it's the same pair in the same area trying to nest again, and they'll try 3 times, maybe 4, but probably just the 3. Because we've had huge problems with dogs at Farquhar just smashing the nests pretty much as soon as they're on the ground. Oh yeah, sorry, that tagged Godwit was at Farquhar yesterday, just on the sand flats on the sea side of Charlie's Island. I'm not sure if it'll go between Harrington and Farquhar, because there was about 60 Godwits at Harrington yesterday, so it might move around a little bit. Oh yeah, so the small shelters, they've trialled them with pretty good success for hooded plovers in the south coast. And they're pretty good, but I think the hooded plovers, they more run away as opposed to fly up. So the little terns will fly up, the adults will fly straight up when a predator comes. We did trial them here. We didn't really see the chicks using them much. The crabs seem to use them a lot, which is weird. I can't explain that at all. But there was always heaps of crab tracks in there, which is problematic because if you've got chicks in there and it's attracting crabs, and they get covered by sand a bit. So not as good as we would have thought, but there was also quite a bit of driftwood on the beach. So perhaps they'll aim for other cover. So they'll run into the spinifex or into bits of driftwood if they can. So it's definitely, well, I think it was definitely worth a try, but yeah, it wasn't so successful for the little terns. I'm not sure who the fauna shorebird coordinator is. Is that like in the Manning area, Stan? Is Stan there? I'd be happy for a link for the recording to go to whoever. I think we'll put it on the Facebook group. I think that's, yeah. Oh, you're muted, Helen.
Sorry. Yeah. So the recording from today will go onto YouTube, and then I'll put that onto our Manning Coastcare Facebook page and probably email it out as well. And yeah, of course, anyone's welcome to share it. The more eyes that land on it, the better. So yeah, yep. Absolutely.
Hi, Silas. It's Sam. I just found the unmute button. So yeah, look, Wendy Bourne is our the fauna shorebird coordinator. She's at Johns River. So I'll try and connect you together. So because yeah, look, we have quite a few referrals for shorebirds to be collected, and not a great success in looking after them, as you realise. Once they're usually pretty exhausted, and they just don't cope with kind of coming into care, unlike a lot of terrestrial birds. So it's a real challenge.
Yeah, it's problematic. That'd be great to get Wendy's contact. Yeah, it's pretty hard. There was a bird, maybe it was born with a deformity in its wing, and it kept getting brought into marine rescue. But we just kept putting it out there because any efforts with the little tern chicks, it doesn't work, unfortunately. Like it just hasn't worked trying to reintroduce them and then get them to fish and fly back and stuff. It hasn't.
Yeah, look, just while I'm unmuted, I was interested to hear that Channel Bill, we've got our Channel Bills around here as well, and you certainly know they're around, you can't miss them. I'm just wondering whether, given they migrate, whether they do the same thing when they head up north and pop eggs, and all the other birds nest up there as well, so they get a couple of breeding, so they're sort of almost breeding all the time, both northern and southern hemisphere.
Maybe. I have no idea. Like, I know the Channel Bills parasitize corvid nests, I think. They probably would, I guess. They're pretty sneaky.
Yeah, we've had a few. I don't do any of the long-term care, but our bird coordinator, Carl over at Rainbow Flats, looked after a few Channel Bill fledglings and sort of kept them until it's time to sort of let them go to catch up with the migration. But so we certainly get a lot of breeding around here. So yeah, it just sort of figures if they then migrate north for the northern summer, they do the same thing up there, which is pretty smart bird behaviour.
Yeah, and that's one of the problems with migratory birds. If they can do that, it sort of overcomes problems because they have homes in more than one place. Like it's a real issue. You have an issue in one of your homes, and then it mucks things up. But if you can breed, if they could do that, that'd be really good, I reckon. Was there any more questions? I think that's it.
Silas.
Yep.
Roger here. I don't have a question, but it would be wonderful, I think, for your story of you and what you do here to be told and tell everybody.
Yeah.
Would love to talk to you about that perhaps later on and discuss how we can do that. And it's an opportunity for you to be promoting your little group walks if they go ahead too. So perhaps we catch up afterwards and have a chat about that, if that's okay. Yeah, whenever. Do you want? Do you have my email or?
Well, I'll be sharing your contact details, Silas. So maybe cool. You guys can just get in touch afterwards once I do that.
Yep, just get in touch with me and we'll have a chat. That'd be excellent because yeah, I'm pretty keen to sort of spread the word as much as possible.
Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you.
We've got one more question from Kate. What's the Facebook Shorebird?
Oh, yeah.
following?
So it is Puro Coro Coro Miranda Shorebird group. So I'm trying to get the spelling right.
It's got to be one of the most New Zealand sounding.
Yeah,
groups
I think
I've
my
heard.
pronunciation's probably miles off.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's the Puro Coro Coro Miranda Shorebird Centre. And actually, the guy that put those maps together is doing a talk on Tuesday evening, I think, about the Godwits and the tagging program. So if you check out that Facebook site, I think it's a free talk. Yeah, probably be super interesting, I reckon.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourselves or pop something in the chat if anyone's got any other questions or comments. No, we all done? Well, we're just over time, so
Thanks, everyone.
yeah. Thank you, Silas. Very much appreciate
no
sharing
worries.
your knowledge.
Thanks.
Always
And yeah, happy World Migratory Bird Day.
great.
So yeah, get out there and look at some birds, or at least hear the birds.
Yes. Yeah.
I'll just stop the recording.